All right, and welcome into episode 8 of Are You Cirrus? I am meteorologist Andrew Dockery.
And I'm Jamie Arnold, chief meteorologist here at WMBF News, and we have a guest.
First-time guest.
Yes, we're breaking the mold today.
Oh, we don't know what we're doing. Meteorologist Robert Whitehurst is here. Robert, welcome to
Thank
Are
you.
You Cirrus? What do you think of like the set here?
It's like the ambiance going on over here.
Mood lighting.
Mood lighting.
Yeah, it's good.
We need the jazz music that you provide for the weather center.
right.
Jazz. There we go, smooth jazz. I feel like a radio DJ here. I do want to say, what did we tell people? We're not canceled yet.
Not canceled yet.
Remember
this
that
is,
one?
This is episode 8. Still haven't been canceled. Right?
Although we're the first guest here, you never know.
Oh, yeah, with the first guest. Yeah,
It's all going downhill.
Yeah, anything's possible now.
Like, share, subscribe,
Download,
retweet,
read, whatever you do with podcasts. Yeah,
comment. I don't
Yeah.
know. Rate.
Rate.
Rate
We still
is
need the
big
rates.
one.
Yeah, still need
Apparently,
the rates.
we're still not 5-star yet,
Yeah.
so we need to get to that. All right, Robert. We're just going to get straight into it before we get back into some of the viewer questions. For people who may not know, tell us a little bit about Robert Whitehurst.
You know, I just realized just a few months ago.
We need a book.
10 years here.
10 years.
This summer.
Yeah.
Really?
10 years. Summer 2013.
Wow. 10
Time
years.
flies.
And we often joke when we see old pictures or videos of ourselves how much we have aged.
10 years going on 30 years.
Yeah,
of
you were basically
aging.
a baby when you started.
Oh,
I was,
100%.
Yeah. And
Do you remember
now-
the promo we ran? It was the same Robert. From
I just told them to keep it going. I don't.
Yeah.
We don't need the new me. Let's go with the old
Yeah,
me.
just keep the old Robert.
Right. It is funny though. You can look back and it's only just a few years difference, but
it's hard to see yourself, especially after the hurricanes and a couple of babies.
couple kids
will do it. Yeah,
You'll start to age a little
couple kids,
faster.
couple hurricanes.
Yeah.
Yep. That puts
Taking
on
notes
the
as
yeah,
we
right.
speak.
Yeah. Your turn's coming.
Yeah,
Your turn's coming.
I can feel it for sure.
Yep.
But for people that may not know, 10 years you've been here. What do you enjoy doing when you're not working, obviously, other than taking care of 2 little ones?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's been a lot of fun, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
it completely changes what you do in your free time. I mean, most of my time is spent with them, but I love it.
Yep.
A lot of time at the aquarium, going to Broadway. They love to go out to eat. I don't know if Sneaky Beagle around here. She calls it
Love
the
it.
Puppy Food House.
Nice.
Because there is a dog on the
Yep.
logo. So
Yep.
we're a lot of time spent at the Puppy Food House.
Puppy Food House.
Yeah.
I love that.
But in
It's
an area
gonna be
like
the new
this,
name.
you know, we just love to get outdoors.
Yeah.
Enjoying the weather now before it becomes 100 degrees in a couple
Yeah.
months.
You're a big car guy.
Yeah.
A big numbers guy.
Electronics.
Big electronics tech guru.
Low tech, yeah.
Yep. You have your little gadgets. You have your coffee mug warmer that sits in the studio,
Yes.
which I love.
It's a little extra.
I've
is a little
almost
extra.
used it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't. But then he
Yeah.
has the app, so it wouldn't work for me.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, if it's nice, it's a little much.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
you can go on there. You can set your perfect coffee
Yeah, perfect,
temperature.
you're
If you
right,
want your coffee
right.
at 132.5 degrees, that is the cup for you.
Yep.
Oh, let me
And this
tell
is why Robert is our numbers guy and our tech guy.
You're exactly so. If
Yeah.
it wasn't for Robert, we would be running on outdated technology.
Yes.
And our computers would probably already crash.
Yeah.
Anytime I have a problem, I'm like, Robert, I have no
Yeah.
idea what is going on.
Oh, it's funny. The first, I think, year I was here, I was like, let me go in and do some Windows updates.
Right.
You know, let's get these things. It's like, you have 150 pending Windows updates.
I don't know.
I don't know what we missed, but
Oh, that's funny. We had an episode where we were talking about the backstory of WMBF News.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about some of our favorite stories and moments. Is there one for you that sticks out that you're like, oh, I remember this to this day?
there's been a couple.
right.
There's been a lot.
Yeah.
Obviously, Hurricane Matthew is a big one.
Yeah.
But, you know, the one, it was a small event, but it was a big event for where we were live.
Mm-hmm.
We were covering an ice storm in my
Yes.
typical spot.
Yep.
I think we were along Interstate 95 in Dillon County, and we were about to go on live.
Yeah.
And I think it was morning show, probably 6 a.m. And we hear a crack. What is that? And it's a tree falling on the power lines, probably 50 yards down the road from us. And I'm in my feeling, all right, stand by. It comes down on the power lines, and they start bouncing above us, and we sprint. The photographer and I, we run across the parking lot. And the producers at home, or here at the studio, didn't know what was going on. They're like, are y'all good for your live shot? No, we're not good for our live shot. And we just stood there and waited because we didn't think about it, parked
Right.
underneath the power lines at
Yeah.
the time. Now we're like, maybe not
Probably
the
not,
best
yeah.
idea in an ice storm to park underneath the power lines, but that was one of the scarier experiences here. You just hear the crack. You're like, what
Do you
could
remember what
be?
year that was?
Probably
That would have been the
15, 14 maybe.
the winter of 13-14 when we had the two big winter storms. Yeah.
Big ice storm.
My favorite Robert memory, and it's a video I still love to watch when I come across it, is you and I in front of the studio on the back half of Matthew. We had been in the studio all day long covering Matthew, and as weather geeks, you want to be outside.
Just
You
get
want
out.
to see
Yeah.
it. So there's the back half of Matthew came in, and if locals will remember this, the front half of Matthew was all the wind and the surge. The back half was all wind. And we convinced the managers and the powers to be to let us do live shots in front of the building just so that we could be out in those 70, 75 mile per hour gusts. And that was just a really fun time to see us out there getting kind of battered around by the wind.
And I remember the smell.
The smell, the pine, the
you
fresh
could smell the
pine.
pine.
Yeah, the fresh pine. The air was full of pine.
On the backside of the storm.
Yeah, and even here where there's no big trees, there were just leaves and pine needles in the air just blowing across, and it was a fun time.
And that's been the most wind damage that we've seen since I've been here for a storm.
That's the biggest wind hurricane that we've had. I know at least in my time here and your time here.
Yeah.
Well, that's I'm glad you brought that up because that's kind of where we're going to transition. There were so many people who liked last episode.
Yeah.
They said it was very authentic and their favorite one yet, which was awesome. I was very happy to hear that.
I was worried about it because we got a little
really nerdy.
We got a little nerdy and a little techie in last episode and a little deep on that. So
I thought people might turn it off. I'll be honest with you. We had Jim Cantori tweet and said that he enjoyed it. We even had
Josh Morgerman, Ice Cyclone. Yeah, gave us a little shout out and appreciated the chat that we had about him. So
so that led to some viewer questions.
Yep.
And this is going to be for all of us because our answers may vary, which we appreciate the viewer questions. The first one came from Mark, and I thought this was interesting, and I'd love to hear your all's opinion. Why do others broadcast the cone of uncertainty? Isn't the forecast term like that now improper because the forecasts are improving? Why do you all at WMBF News not use it at all?
I don't think there's a right answer or a wrong answer
I don't
to
think so
that.
either.
And I actually responded to his question because he messaged us on Facebook, and I was like, well, because honestly, it's kind of a mouthful.
Yeah.
You know? But then it also made me think about it. Is cone of uncertainty like a good term? Because it sort of says, okay, well, it's going to be kind of in here. Or is it a bad term as in, well, it's not really that accurate?
Yeah.
I don't know. Could go, I feel like it could go either way as far as interpreting it.
Yeah, it's tough for the public.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I
Yeah.
mean, and a lot of our job is to take these more technical terms from the Storm Prediction Center and Hurricane Center and try to make it a little easier to digest on air when we're putting this information out. So,
So I
the
think
cone is always a tough one. I know y'all talked about it a lot last week. Chuck.
We can talk about it for another.
we could do
episode.
another 3 episodes just on the cone. Yeah.
But the cone of uncertainty, I mean, that's what it is.
Right.
It's an area of uncertainty for the forecast.
Yeah.
But is there an easier way for us to describe that on air?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been trying to think back of how I say it on air.
I think I say cone.
I think
or the forecast
I say
track.
cone or the latest track.
Yeah.
You know, the latest cone, the latest track.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, I do think too, because the cone of uncertainty wasn't a term that wasn't adopted strictly for the National Hurricane Center.
Yeah.
Statistics use the cone of uncertainty on graphs. So I feel like statistically speaking, it is accurate, but also for us, we don't use it just because it is a mouthful.
yeah.
That's kind of my answer. I mean, if I kept saying that over again, it'd be tongue twisted.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, too, you're trying to shorten 3.5
Again.
minute forecast, and you got to figure out what to cut.
Right.
And those words are it. Mark, good question. I really think we were talking about the accuracy of that too, and the forecast just over the past 10 years about how that cone continues to shrink, and it's amazing what they do, which brings us to Sally's question. I love this one. For each of us, where do you all see the future of forecasts for tropical storms and hurricanes going in the next few years?
I mean, I think we're going to see the cone continuing to narrow, but I think we're also going to be eventually getting to a point where we're about as narrow as we can get.
Yeah.
You know?
Things always improve fast at first, and then when you think about percentages, if it's large, 50% is a big jump, but then 50% of that smaller portion is smaller, and so you end up, you might be continuing to have a 50% improvement, but that 50% is a much smaller number. And I think an area that still we are improving a lot on the track forecast, but intensity forecasts are
It's
still,
Mm-hmm.
they've kind of held steady with
Yeah.
maybe some improvement. There's just so many different processes
Yeah.
for a hurricane to strengthen or weaken. That
Yeah.
That's where a lot of improvement, hopefully, will come. I mean,
Yep.
certainly you've seen it if you followed hurricanes.
Right.
That National Hurricane Center says it a lot. Like the tracks were pretty
Pretty
good
good,
here,
pretty good.
But is it going to rapidly strengthen?
Yeah.
Is there going to be some sneaky wind shear of the atmosphere that may
Yeah.
weaken the storm? And that kind of stuff just isn't picked up yet.
Yeah. And I don't think people understand, as big and as powerful as hurricanes are, they're also really fragile. You know, a small amount of wind shear, small amount of dry air, small processes within the hurricane itself can really lead to huge fluctuations in intensity, either up or down.
I've heard it too a lot, and I don't know if it's maybe just from the outside in perspective when you're not used to hurricanes. Oh, you know, forecasting hurricanes it's got to be easy. They give you everything you need, right? The track, and then you just relay the information. When it's not the case at all, I can't tell you the amount of times where us three, even Matt, we've been in a group text and saying, okay, like this model ramps it up to this many millibars or drops it to where it's a category, while this one shows weakening, and that's the trick. It's kind of like snow in the mountains. They all show snow, but which one shows, you know, those deformation bands or the big amounts. So I don't know. It's tough. One thing I appreciate about Robert, it's not my favorite Robert moment, but when I first came to Kentucky, I knew nothing about true hurricane forecasting. And we spent the first year together maybe on that shift where I was working middays, you were working evenings. This man coming from Florida State, I was like, what is all of this stuff?
It's just one of those things you have to get experience with it to get a good handle. Especially an area like this, not even hurricanes, but just the sea breeze. If you've never dealt with something like that, it just talk about throwing a forecast off.
Oh, yeah.
I remember the first sea breeze or sea fog forecast, and I busted something by 10 degrees, and I was like, yo, I am sorry.
Yeah.
And
Sea
you're like,
fog,
"Oh,
it'll happen.
happens."
It'll happen.
It happens for sure. So we appreciate those questions. We always tell people, I guess, on the debut on YouTube, you can ask more questions. You can send them messages. But I want to focus on the local storm impact. You tell this to every hurricane talk you go to. How much are we overdue for a big one?
Running on 70 years now, overdue for a big one here in Horry County. On average, if you look at statistics for Horry County, we should be getting a Category 3 or Category 4 hurricane about once every 30 to 35 years. That's landfall in Horry County. If you go back, the last one that we had to make landfall in Horry County was Hazel in 1954. So we're, every year that goes by that we don't get a 3 or 4 puts us 1 year closer to when we're going to get that 3 or 4. So
yeah, we always feel like wait for the big one. We prepare for the big one. But what we wanted to bring Robert on for is it doesn't always take a big one to cause the impact. So we've seen that. You two have seen that the most.
Yeah.
With, I think of Matthew, I think of Ian, I think of Isaias. Just for perspective, for maybe people that don't even remember, let's just walk through some of those storms.
Okay.
Some of the similarities, some of the differences. Hurricane Matthew, I was not here.
Yep.
I remember seeing the photos. You're like our storm surge expert. I don't know. I feel like you've gotten to where you start to know some of the trouble spots. As far as Hurricane Matthew goes, leading up to it and the forecast and how it verified, how did everything play out?
That was an interesting story. That was a fun storm to forecast.
I'm going to sit back.
That one came up the east coast of Florida.
Yep.
And eventually came in to, I believe it made Georgetown landfall there.
Yep.
Some of the early forecasts had it staying farther offshore. Some forecasts had it looping offshore.
Yeah.
There was some crazy things going on early there.
There was about 24 hours there where the track brought it up Florida, sort of maybe 50, 100 miles east of the Grand Strand, and then bent back south, back towards Florida. And so that was a kind of a crazy day or two. Like, is it going to go back to Florida for a second hit? Is it going to loop completely back around? Obviously, that wasn't the final outcome, but that was kind of a weird 2 or 3 days there where those models and the track were all over the place.
And that track coming up that way just really funnels the water in here. You think about the Grand Strand, the way it's shaped.
Yes.
A little half crescent.
Yep.
And it just focuses all that water in here.
Yeah.
And I'll remember with that storm, so the observation data here for the ocean is at Spring Maid Pier. And we were watching that data, and the winds went zero.
Yeah.
Like, is the center of the storm moving over? That's
What's
weird.
happening? Yeah.
And then we started getting photos in.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that station was in the ocean.
It was in the ocean, yeah.
As we lost that pier.
Yeah.
And so I believe that's when we lost our tidal data, too.
Yep.
Coming in from there.
Yeah, and we ended up being without it for a good year. I think it was about a year
while.
before we could get data back from Springmate after that. And the other weird thing, and this is probably something maybe we should have touched on in the last episode, but the weird thing about hurricanes here, especially with tracks like Matthew and Ian and Isaias, is in so many instances, our coast runs southwest to northeast. So many of our hurricanes parallel the coast, sort of in that general track. It's a lot easier to forecast where a hurricane's going to go if it's hitting like this. If it's doing like this, one wobble is all it takes to kind of bring it on shore, which is kind of what Matthew did, and kind of what even Ian did a little bit. Matthew sort of wobbled into Georgetown, literally came up 17, and actually sort of wobbled back over the ocean east of Wilmington. And it was literally just that wobble that gave us that direct landfall.
I don't think the forecast track had it initially making landfall here.
There wasn't a landfall in the forecast until the morning of.
I didn't think so.
Yeah, the morning of was the first time that Matthew was shown as officially landfalling in South Carolina. And by that point, we were 12 hours out.
At that point, it's go time.
Yeah.
What were the winds like on the right side of Matthew as it was making landfall?
On the front side, nothing too out of the ordinary.
No.
We were gusting maybe 50. I think we had a gust or two to 60 out on the beaches. And then everybody talks about the weird thing with Matthew was the front half was all the rain, insane rain. First time Myrtle Beach ever had a flash flood emergency. We were just raining at insane rates. I remember looking at the sky cam and just water as far as you could see here. I came over, very brief sort of a lull, and then the models had been showing about 24 hours before that there was going to be a blast of very strong wind on the backside of Matthew, and we kind of made note of it, and we even sort of mentioned it possibly happening on the air, but I don't think we were really convinced that that was going to happen because it's a little unusual, especially for hurricanes here. You get most of your wind kind of on that front side, that northeast wind. But sure enough, the eye passed by, and we started seeing reports. The wind actually started first in the PD, so places like Florence and Bennettsville were gusting to 70 miles per hour, and sure enough, it hit like a wall, like northwest winds, no rain, but a northwest wind gusting to hurricane force, basically in the entire area. Yeah.
That's tough. Matthew to Isaias. What are similarities that you all saw? Anything in particular?
The storm just kind of blurs for me. I don't
What's
know why.
What's crazy, though, is when I look back at the surge data, I'm like, I'm with you. I remember more about Dorian than Isaias.
Yeah. Some storms stick out. Isaias is weird. I think we all just want to forget it because we had to say Isaias for a week and a half saying that stupid name. But
it's back on the list, too.
It was a weird one. It was another just kind of strange storm that, are we going to get anything from it? Are we not? Is it going to be close? Is it not going to be close?
It was one of those that was so focused if you were inland of the waterway.
Yeah, not really a big deal.
Yeah.
You didn't get anything.
Yeah.
You got some wind and rain.
Yeah.
But if you were right along the beach, I remember being out in Springmate Live and just seeing some of the flooding down there. And I was like, this is pretty impressive for a storm that when we were forecasting, I was like, okay, this is going to pass. And it's really that 50-mile wiggle room that you were talking about that makes all the difference. And we saw with Ian. So I'm glad you said that about Isaias because
and Isaias came in, especially for the North Strand, just behind Matthew for
at the time.
surge. At the time.
Yeah. Right.
And the North Strand, because Isaias was really bad up in the Cherry Grove area.
Yeah.
Because I was up there the next day. I mean, all the piers.
We had
and the
Zach
canals,
and Gabe up there.
Yeah, it was really, it was nasty.
I think the recording site there is at the Swing Bridge.
Yes.
In North Myrtle.
Yep. Yep. And came in.
So kind of in the waterway a little bit.
Yeah. So that was a weird one.
It is weird. When it comes to storm surge, and this is a question for me and for the viewers, I guess, what's improved or has it improved or what do we still have to improve when it comes to localized storm surge forecast? Where can we be better?
I think the improvement now is that we've seen it happen.
Yeah.
And so we start to see, okay,
What-
when we hit 10
Yeah.
feet at Spring May, what areas are starting to
Right.
flood. But those first couple events, and that we've had so many historic events here in the last 10 years,
Yeah.
it's tough to know
Yeah.
who's going to see what, because that hasn't happened. I mean, we can model it all we want, but until it actually happens. And so that's why a lot of times you'll see the National Weather Service goes out afterwards, and they'll take boats on these flooded
Yeah.
rivers to see, okay,
Yeah.
let's find out what areas are flooding at this level.
Right.
And if you ever look at a river forecast, at the bottom it'll say, at 12 feet, this road and this road
Yeah.
will start to see water. Some
Notice
homes
how they get
along
that.
this road.
Yeah.
And they're getting that from previous events. But when we're hitting these new levels
when you
on the
start hitting
Waccamaw,
new
on the
le- yeah.
waterway.
Yeah.
And so I think now we're starting to get a better idea
Yeah.
of what levels mean what for different
Yeah.
areas around here. And
And-
hopefully
and
we
that's-
don't go above those.
And that's
numbers
actually
again.
kind of a good thing because we saw Matthew. I don't remember what the number was for storm surge for Matthew, but we saw what the storm surge for Matthew did. Then we saw the kind of the high water that came with Isaias. So then as we went into Ian and even some of the other storms with Dorian, you have a baseline and sort of in your head. You know, like you said, all right, we know when we hit X amount that we're going to have surge running up to the dunes. You get another foot, you're breaking through the dunes, you're flooding Cherry Grove, you're flooding Garden City and Surfside. So it does kind of, like I said, it's not a good thing, but we now have a lot of points of reference.
We had the level at 13.6 for Matthew on that graphic. I printed out a graphic because I couldn't remember. Jamie makes fun of me, Robert,
Yeah.
because I've come prepared with previous graphics. I'll tell you what helped with Ian is I remember that morning. I don't think it was forecast much higher than 9.8.
No.
I don't think we were expecting the third largest storm surge.
Yeah,
that one creeped up
in the
through
lead
And it
up.
kept creeping.
Yeah. And I remember the three of us were all working at the same time. Robert was keeping an eye on the actual numbers, and this very graphic is
That
the one that
graphic.
we showed on the air
Yep.
over and over again, and we were literally updating it about every 10 minutes to say,
It just
here's
kept
where we
going
are.
higher and
Yeah.
higher. I think we're coming out of high tide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we were hoping to see the numbers level off or drop
Yeah.
a bit, but the surge was counteracting the falling tide.
Yeah.
And so those numbers just kept creeping up higher and
Yeah.
higher. And we're lucky it didn't happen even an hour or two earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Continuing into high tide, because those numbers would have been higher.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
It's-
11:30 high tide in Myrtle, right around noon for Cherry Grove and Myrtle's Inlet. That was the first surge for me being here, where you saw impacts from the South Strand all the way
All
to
the way-
the
yeah,
north.
it was the whole
I
coast.
didn't see that in Dorian or Isaias, so I knew when Pawleys Island was happening. Okay,
that it was coming up. And if you talk to people, it's sort of a 50-50 mix, but I still think it's interesting. Some people say that Ian's surge was worse than Matthew's, especially on the South Strand, which by the numbers, Ian still comes in a little below Matthew.
Yeah.
But by talking to people, because you and I were out there the next day, and people were like, yeah, it was way worse than Matthew. And I think what happened, the interesting thing with Ian was, if you remember, like the 3 days before Ian, we had a big cold front that came through. And so we had big high pressure off in New England. We had Ian down to our south. The cold front came through, and for about 3 days, it was kind of cold, unusually chilly for late September. Like we were stuck in the 50s and cloudy, but we had a howling northeast wind. And that northeast wind blew for basically 3 days out over the ocean at 40 to 50 miles per hour, and really started building up the wave heights out there. So that then finally, as Ian sort of made that turn or crossed Florida and started to come, you already had this tremendous amount of wave energy out there. So I think the huge battering waves are what made a lot of the damage worse, because the waves that we were seeing on Skycam, without a doubt, were bigger than Matthew.
Oh, yeah.
Than Matthew.
especially on the pier. I remember
On the
those
pier, I
shots.
mean, to see the waves cresting over the ends of the piers. We did not see that with Matthew.
And that's the thing
Yeah.
with storm surge, it does not count waves.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
doesn't count
no,
So
waves.
yeah, the waves
Right.
are on top of these levels, and so
Yeah.
10 or 15 foot waves on top of a 10-foot storm surge.
Yeah.
That's a lot of energy.
Yeah.
I know when we were talking, or I talked to some people up in Merle's or down at Merle's, the marsh walk was destroyed. I remember it. Do y'all remember the ship that was, I guess, on to Goat Island or somewhere over? It's still out there.
Still, yeah, a little sailboat
I
still
hope
out
they
there. Yeah.
keep it
I know,
and
it's
just
kind of a
name
fun
it
little landmark, right?
the Ian ship
Right.
for that matter. But then you go to Garden City, and what was crazy for me is the amount of sand
Yep.
that was in Garden City. It looked like a completely different city. But then also underneath, these houses that are on stilts, there were some. I'm 5'7". There were some we could walk to and touch the roof
yeah.
of the bottom of these houses.
And a few really unlucky cars that were left in place and had sand up to about the handlebar, the doors. Yeah.
Do you remember the hotel that we went to and that we saw the pool was filled with sand?
Yep.
But the surge was so bad that it got up to the second floor.
Yeah, you could see where the waves had crashed onto the second floor. So yeah, and all from a one. A one.
A one.
Yeah.
Man.
Yep.
Anything you all want to add to that?
I mean, those are the three, but
You all remember way more than that.
It was such and still is a crazy stretch. Hopefully this is the year. It really started in 15 with at the time, which was called the flood of the century, with Joaquin, which was a hurricane offshore, kind of funneled moisture in. It was always
Weird setup.
But Joaquin was always a couple hundred miles offshore, but the setup was funneling moisture in here. And that was kind of the first big event that you and I covered together. And I remember sitting basically here where the old weather center used to be, and seeing the numbers coming out of the models of 20, 25 inches of rain. We're like, no.
It's so hard to
way.
believe stuff like
No
that.
way.
I mean, models throw crazy things out.
Yeah.
That's why we still have jobs.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
If we didn't,
Right.
because they're
Yeah.
too accurate.
Models do crazy things
Yeah.
sometimes. And so you see them throwing out historic numbers, you're like, okay, that's just the GFS being the GFS
Yeah.
again. But then 2 days straight it's showing these numbers. You're like,
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the Euro's on board, and then all the models are on board, and it's day after day after day. And then you start to think, okay, well, maybe this is really going to happen, So that was strange. So that was October of 2015. Literally a year and a day later was Matthew, October 8th, 2016. A lot of people kind of forget Irma. Irma was 17, which was a really strange storm, obviously a big storm for Florida.
Yeah.
Went up into Florida and actually curled back west in South Georgia, but we still had 60-mile-per-hour gusts here and still had storm surge that was probably worse than usual because the dunes were still gone after Matthew, so we had storm surge flooding from that, so that was 17. 18 was, of course, Florence, which was nothing here as far as surge goes, but the historic flooding. 18, Dorian? Or did we take 18 off?
No, 18
No,
wasn't
19
off.
was Dorian. No, 18 was Florence. 19 was Dorian. 20 was Isaias. We had a break in 21. 22 was Ian, and here we are in 23. So
it's been quite the stretch.
It has been a long stretch, yeah, which is why we look the way we do now. This is why we look so bad.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been crazy. And hopefully we'll get a break this year.
Hope so.
Hopefully.
And I think the thing is with the storm surge, a lot of these areas that have seen storm surge with these recent storms are kind of our typical areas. Like it's not a huge surprise
Yeah.
that you saw these high numbers in Garden
Right.
City, but you get some of these bigger storms in here. Now we have a stout dune line here in Myrtle Beach, the city itself,
Yeah.
and the elevation's a bit higher.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a much bigger disaster in this area than people maybe even realize when we get a bigger storm.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be these areas that, you know what, okay, well, I've seen these storms.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any flooding.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of spots that have never seen it before.
Yeah.
If we get a 3 or a 4.
That is
it
a
comes into
really
our
good
south.
perspective that I honestly never think about, because you do have people that I was fine in Dorian, I was fine in Isaias, I was fine in Matthew, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And when a big one does come,
Yeah. And when you look at the peak storm surge maps here, especially for Horry County, they can get kind of scary. I mean, there's spots in Myrtle Beach where you could potentially have high water from storm surge up to the 17 bypass.
Yeah, widespread. Yeah, widespread. 4 and 5s, yeah.
Yeah. You can even back, depending on the right strength and the right track, you can back storm surge all the way up to Waccamaw into parts of Conway. So, it's... let's not do that. I'm too old for that.
we won't show that map.
I'm too old for that. Yeah, but that's a worst case scenario. But it's a scenario, that kind of in the back of your mind you have to think about, which is I think why one of the reasons they moved the EOC in Conway, Horry County EOC, they moved it and strengthened it. It's Category 5 rated, but also kind of got it out of a flood-prone area just in case we ever have to deal with that worst case.
I mean, you think we've been close. If Hugo was 50 miles north, if Hazel was 50 miles south.
If had Florence not weakened in literally 50 miles,
because it was forecast, what is it, 4 just offshore?
There was a good 36 hours there where Florence was forecast to landfall here as a 4. I'll never forget having to go
straight
on air.
in. Yeah,
I will never forget having to go on air and literally the hurricane icon with a 4 in the middle of it was on top of Myrtle Beach, 140 mile per hour winds, and that's that it got people's attention. They started listening then.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I do want to ask this because someone sort of asked it as a question, and I wasn't sure how to phrase it. We're just going to try it. With social media nowadays, especially the post models and just amateur meteorologists, we can name it whatever we want. What can we at WMBF News, especially after what you've learned, what we've talked about, do better in future hurricane seasons? What do you think?
I don't know. I'm still thinking about it.
Me too.
I'm still thinking about it a lot after the last episode and after everything that I learned at the conference. Do we show less?
Yeah.
Do we show less? Do we literally keep it really simple? And if the cone from the Hurricane Center is the most accurate, do we just kind of stick with that? Is that enough?
Yeah. Spaghetti models to me mean less for the public than what maybe I've put an emphasis on in the past.
I think they're good early.
Yes.
They're good early.
To show the amount of uncertainty. What we're 6-7 days out.
Yeah.
I think post, so the track goes to 5.
Yeah.
Post that. Because a lot of times the uncertainty increases exponentially day 6, 7.
Yeah, you're talking 1,000-mile span.
Yeah.
And, even some, I think it's storm by storm.
Yeah.
Some storms are
good.
more confident than others. Others, even the National Hurricane Center will say, the Euro's on the far right side of this track.
Yeah.
GFS is on the far left side of this track. For now, we're splitting the difference.
Yep.
And so at that point, okay, maybe we show this is the track, but it's probably going to change within that cone.
And like I said, I think that leads to, like you said, it is storm by storm and case by case, but just making sure that we're explaining how it all works and really explaining the cone and where the uncertainty comes from with each individual storm. And if it's a storm that's going to impact us, then that's when we really get serious about it. If it looks like it's going to be a storm that we have to deal with in 5 or 6 or 7 days, let's stop focusing on where exactly that cone is and start focusing on what we could see.
Impacts.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite things, that the graphics that I think you made with the storm surge for local Merle's Inlet, or I don't know where you got that data, but that helps out a lot. I think more of that, even with wind and rain, is going to be the future, to kind of get people to understand it. There were so many people on the debut. I wish it would keep your comments on the YouTube. So many people on the debut last Thursday night that said, like, I didn't know that about the cone, or like, you focus on the cone and they think that's where the worst is going to be, when that is completely opposite.
Yep.
So
And it could be different up here. I mean, a storm that's in Florida, maybe more centralized with that core of very strong winds. But as they come farther north, getting into the jet stream, the wind shear, they begin to shear apart. So if we have a storm, a sheared storm, so the wind shear is pushing a lot of the storms off to the east side. If it makes landfall in North Myrtle, it could be sunny here.
Yeah.
And all the activities, it could still be a Category 1 shear storm, and all the activities to our east.
Yeah.
So that's when the cone, again, is like, it makes it tough in there.
It does.
Exactly.
And we always, our storms can be Hugo style. We have a big, powerful hurricane coming in, has your typical look, but then we can have these big sheared messes that come in here.
Big messes. Yeah.
And you don't see that as much to our south. Like the more they come farther north, the more they start to take on some different characteristics.
You start getting dry air intrusion. You start getting more wind shear. As a hurricane comes out of the tropics, it's going to start feeling more and more impacts that would make it turn into not as neat of a hurricane.
Right.
But those are also the same things that increase the difficulty in the forecasting.
And Hurricane Matthew was that way. The reason we had that strong burst of winds was the dry air, which you wouldn't think of. Like, the dry air's clearing all the rain out,
Yeah.
but that dry air can help to mix down
those gusts.
strong winds,
Yeah.
and it was that dry air filtering in
Yeah.
behind Matthew.
Yeah, and Matthew kicked off fall.
It
Matthew,
did.
Matthew
yeah.
literally
Yeah.
Matthew literally changed the pattern. We went from summer to fall. I remember covering the flooding from Matthew, the aftermath, and it was cold. I was out there on the Waccamaw River, in my jacket in the 40s.
Yeah.
It changed the pattern, and a lot of times those late season hurricanes can kind of do that. Even somewhat Ian did it. It kind of snapped summer's back, and after Ian it was nice. It was beautiful.
It was nice.
Yeah.
I do remember that.
Yep.
Robert, for more about Robert Whitehurst, where can people go to find you?
I'm on Twitter, but I'm more just like
Yeah.
I'm just
I'm
looking.
peeking in, I'm
I'm
just
just
looking
looking.
to
I'm
see.
just looking.
Robert is amazing on Twitter. I don't know who you follow or what your
He gets all
algorithms
kinds of
are,
stuff.
but he gets the scoops and the breaking news and the details on everything, and it's wonderful. He'll say, "Oh man, there's so and so President Putin's doing it." It's like
I'm very active on Twitter, just not tweeting much. I'm just always looking.
Just looking.
But
Looking,
Facebook,
creeping. Yeah.
find me on Facebook. I'm much more active on there.
Yeah, and I will say I got to give Robert, because I meant to say this at the beginning. Robert is truly one of the greatest forecasters I've ever met.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Knows your stuff, and Robert will pick out a pattern from like a week out. Stuff that I'm like too busy to even pay attention to, and Robert's like, Sunday looks kind of good for severe weather. Sure enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not only that, too, but like very humble about it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people in this business that are not. So we apprecithink that, Robert.
Yeah.
Thank you for being
Thank
our
you.
first
Yeah,
guest.
thank you.
Right, this was fun.
Yeah.
This was fun. This was our first guest. We weren't sure how it was going to work out, but I think it worked out pretty good.
Next week, we have the grilled cheese man himself.
Yeah, which if you don't know the story behind that, well, I'm sure we will fill you in on why he is Mr. Grilled Cheese, Matty B.
Oh, can't wait for Bullock.
Fratty Matty.
Fratty Matty.
Fratty Matty.
We're good. It's going to be a lot of laughs next
Yeah.
week. That does it for episode 8.
Yeah. Episode 8. So do all the things that you're supposed to do with the liking and subscribing and downloading and rating and whatever. Because as long as y'all are still enjoying this, we're just going to keep doing it.
We'll
Just
figure out something to talk about.
This beat's working for a living.
Yeah. Maybe one of these days, too, we could bring Robert back on to talk about his telescope, because I'm still intrigued by that.
Yeah. And cars.
In cars.
Just I'll like be out that day, because if you want me to go to sleep, it's talking about cars.
I just
So,
random like credit card points, whatever you
right.
want to know.
Yeah,
I
credit
got a lot
card
of little
points.
random
Yeah, all
knowledge
those
to
Dave
share.
Ramsey over here.
Yeah. I'll
funny.
be out that day, but Robert can be my guest. Can be the guest fill in.
All right. Are you serious? Some other conversation between you and us. Y'all have a good one.
Appreciate it.